This is how Debussy asks a question. I'm honestly obsessed with how he answers it. That question is only the starting point, but it generates a perfect little miniature piece. And what he does is so cool. It operates so solidly at the formal level that I'm just like, this guy is honestly a magician. The way he works out the consequences of the musical material that he introduces in that question is so unbelievably tight. And from start to finish, it's just really, really beautiful music. It just means that you reach the end of the piece and you're like, how has he done that? And on top of that, he does this in only about 3 minutes with just one flute. The piece is called Syrinx and it's for solo flute. It's such a perfect little miniature. So let's have a look at this question that he just asked. So the thing that's cool about this question is that it operates on two different levels simultaneously. So on one level, you hear it and it's got this unfinished, incomplete quality, this kind of questioning what's going to happen next kind of vibe. But it also operates on another level, which is that the musical material that it's constructed from is also incomplete in actually a very straightforward sense. So out of the 12 possible notes, it only uses 10. And it leaves a big old gap where the two remaining notes should be. This gap is the source of energy for the entire piece. It's what drives it forward. And the reason this is so important is that it gives the piece a framework that makes it function internally on its own without any external reference. Because to be clear, the piece does have external references. The name of the piece is the name of a Greek nymph called Syrinx, who was being chased by Pan, the god of the wild, who was obsessed with her, but she's not interested. It's actually quite a heavy story. So, in order to escape him, she hides in a river by turning herself into reeds, and Pan cuts them down and makes a flute with them. And the flute is wonderful and makes beautiful music, but in order to make it, he had to kill the love of his life. So, yeah, heavy. But okay, if you know all this, you might listen to the piece and hear all kinds of references to Pan and Syrinx and their emotional states, and maybe this adds a dimension to the piece when you're listening to it, and that's great. But even if you don't know all this, the piece still makes complete sense. It it's internally coherent. It drives itself forward, and that's because of the musical energy generated by this two-note gap. Now, I'm aware I'm hyping up this two-note gap a lot, so let me explain how it works. The gap is an augmented second. And if you saw this out of context, you'd be like, minor third, easy, C sharp to E. Maybe we're in C sharp minor and there's a D sharp in between. Or maybe we're in A major and there's a D natural in between. But you know the Necker cube where you can see it one way or see it the other way? There's a way of seeing this interval where instead of a minor third is an augmented second. So if I was in F minor, say, I could play this. And there you jump straight from the D flat to the E natural, and there's no notes in between. So Debussy takes this gap and he crafts an entire piece around the need to fill this gap. We'll look at exactly how he does it, but he needs to find an E flat and a D natural, and these two notes give structure to the piece. Also, I should say, this way of analysing the piece isn't actually my idea, it's my dad's. So a few weeks ago, I went back to Barcelona to visit my parents, and my dad teaches in a conservatoire there, and we went on a walk and we were chatting about stuff, and he was telling me about how he explains this piece in class, and I loved it, and so I guess here we are. But yeah, all credit to him, and sorry, Father, if I failed to explain this as well as you do. But okay, how does Debussy find this E flat? So he's just asked the question. He's set up the situation with the two missing notes. And then this bit is honestly borderline funny because I mean I was trying to work out what the best way of explaining this is, and I'm not sure this is necessarily the best imagery, but you know with some software how when you move things around they kind of snap into alignment. And obviously most of the time it's super useful and that's why it's there. But sometimes you want to put something in between two other things and you're edging towards the position you want. And then just when you're about to get there, it snaps into alignment with something else. Well, I don't know how much sense this will make, but I think this is what's happening to the music here. So the first time we saw the gap, we approached it from the top and we go, and then we have another go, again approaching it from the top, and we go, and it's the same gap, same problem. So now we try to sneak up on this D flat from the bottom, and so we get, but then the moment we hit the D flat, it snaps into the same problem as before. So we've tried from above and we've tried from below. Then the music pauses for a second and has a think and finds a breakthrough. And it's a really cool moment because it manages to split the gap just by making us change the way that we think about it. It's the Necker cube again. And Debussy even gives us a little hint, which is super delightful in brackets here under the breath mark. It's like we've reached this B natural, and he's like, wait, just think of that as a C flat, and just play this lovely chord. And then that's it. It's something like you've unlocked it, and you can just walk up to the E flat, and it's the easiest thing in the world, and it's like it was there all along. I don't even want to play it here. I want you to hear it directly, how triumphant that top E flat feels. And just like that, we found the first of the two missing notes. But the job's not done, because we still need to find the D natural. And that one turns out to be a more slippery note to pin down. To find that one, the music needs to slow down and almost kind of break down and grind to a halt. And only when it's done that and it's found the D natural can it pick itself back up. But we're getting ahead of ourselves here. Let's go step by step. So we hear the question again, but then when he repeats it, instead of going down from the G flat to the D flat, it's like, well, that didn't work. So let's try this. It goes up from the G flat up to the D flat. But then because that sounds so lovely, it's almost like the music gets distracted for a second and it gets caught in this really beautiful G flat major hexatonic. Well, we've basically just removed the fourth note of a major scale. And this is kind of funny because in this particular kind of hexatonic scale, you get any interval you might want. So you get minor second, you get a major second, you get a minor third, you get a major third, you get a fourth, except the tritone. There's no way of making a tritone with these notes. And then look what he does. He makes us develop an expectation by playing this. And the second time he does this, he thwarts that expectation by instead going and hitting that top A natural. And it's basically just him saying like, look, if we tried operating without tritones and that didn't work and we still haven't found the D natural, I guess let's try some tritones. Also, keep this high A natural in mind, because this will also have consequences for the rest of the piece. This is what I mean, everything ties together so neatly. But yeah, we'll be waiting for a proper resolution for this A natural for a while. Also, if you're paying very close attention, you'll notice that there was a sneaky little D natural in that chromatic flurry of notes. I have a couple of thoughts about this D natural, and I'll come back to it later. But for now, after these falling tritones, the music slows down and gets stuck in a bit of a rut on a few pitches at the lower register of the flute. And it's a really great moment because Again, it's music that works very naturally at two different levels. On the one hand, it really sounds like music that is crunching through a problem or trying to work out how to untangle something. But at the level of the musical material, it is working through something. It's crunching out how to hit that D natural. And the way it finally finds it feels like such a subtle shift. It almost feels like a sleight of hand. It's like you're on these train tracks, and I have no idea what this is called. You know the thing on train tracks where you're on train tracks and then like smoothly shifts you onto some other train tracks, and then that's it. You're off in a completely different direction. This is what it feels like. He's on these train tracks, and then suddenly just like that, he manages to hit the D natural. And then that's it. The work is done. Or is it? Because if we go back all the way to that top A natural, it still hangs over us unresolved. And so something still needs to be done about that. But also the initial question needs to come back. And he's been tying knots all over the place. So he needs to show us how to untie them. Also, this entire way of analysing this piece obviously raises one of the perennial questions when analysing any kind of art, which is, did Debussy know all of this? How much of this was a conscious decision? Had he planned it all out? I mean, okay, in a way, it's just an empirical, historical question, and we'll almost certainly never know. But also, both possible answers are pretty cool. Because if he did have it all schemed out, and the placement of the E flat and the D natural within the piece are the result of a meticulous plan, and he managed to execute on this structure while making it this natural and this beautiful, that's amazing. But if this wasn't conscious and he's ending up with such a tight structure just out of instinct and intuition, I think that's maybe even cooler. If you remember that fleeting D natural in the sliding between tritones, I think this nudges me towards thinking that it was just instinct as opposed to conscious architecting. Because if you do plan it all out, then you probably would just be careful not to put in a D natural before it's the right time structurally. But Debussy's working with what we can actually hear, and so he doesn't care at all about a note that appears for a split second in the middle of a chromatic slide. In any case, he needs to untie the knots that he's created along the way, and look how he brings back the initial question. He first explores a modal passage which is A, beautiful, B, reminiscent of the G flat major hexatonic passage that we saw before, and C, a cool example of how ambiguous music can be when you've got a solo instrument with no harmony. Usually, even if you've got a single instrument, there's a relatively clear implied harmony. You kind of know where home is. But with this passage, my dad and I hear this passage with a completely different tonal centre. He thinks it's A flat Dorian. Whereas I think I'm hearing it as a G flat Ionian. And I think you could probably also hear it as a B flat Phrygian. In any case, this modal passage starts to work itself up into a bit of a frenzy, and it gets darker and more chromatic, and it develops a denser texture. And finally, it resolves that top A natural to the top B flat, which is where we started the piece. And there he asks the question again, but this time, instead of repeating the C, C flat, B flat gesture that we had at the start, he elaborates on it with this completely heartbreaking cry, which I think might be my favourite moment in the whole piece. Actually, I say that's my favourite moment. The last 6 notes of the piece might actually top that, because the thing is, he needs to find a way of ending this piece. And what he goes for is a way of dissolving the tension instead of resolving it, which is really fascinating because it works really, really well. He does two things. First, he smooths the rhythm. So instead of this irregular dotted gesture, he turns it into uniformly spaced triplets. So he makes the rhythm uniform. But the second thing he does is even cooler, and I think the way to understand what's happening is to notice one last thing about the question, which is that in its first 4 notes, it contains all 3 types of seconds. You've got a minor second, and then a major second, and then an augmented second. And so the way that he ultimately decides to dissolve the tension accrued during the piece is to abandon any sense of a distinction between types of second. And so just like he made the rhythm uniform, now he makes all the seconds uniform. And what this means, of course, is that we end up with the dreamlike whole tone scale. And in a piece that's all about the tension generated by an augmented second gap, there's something that feels very neat to me about ending it all by slowly melting into a whole tone scale. Also, look at this little detail. I love this. Look at how he writes out the rhythm. He could have so easily written it as 4 quavers like this. And given that he includes a marking to play slower, and you have some flexibility with the tempo anyway, the 2 versions would be indistinguishable in terms of the duration of the notes. But he goes for this quintuplet, and the point is that the rhythm then has a completely different feel because none of the notes is accented in any way. So as the piece dies down to nothing, all you're left with is complete uniformity.